Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to talk about Jake Muzzin's injury, him being placed onto LTIR last night officially, and what it could mean for the Toronto Maple Leafs and this year's trade deadline. I understand that his injury has the potential to have huge implications for what the Maple Leafs are able to do at this year's trade deadline, and that's the business side of it. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I don't think that we can forget that Jake Muzzin is not a piece on a chessboard, that he's an actual person. And this was a quote from him on Saturday. Muzzin on his play coming back from a concussion. Injuries, they are what they are, and coming back is never easy. It was tough coming back a little bit here. You're a little hesitant maybe, but I feel more comfortable now. And then he was asked if that's the physical play he's talking about, and Muzzin says, yeah, for me, I have to be physical or I'm not as effective. And for me, I think that this is everything that we need to know, because it was clear watching Muzzin play when he did return from injury that there was hesitation in his game. There was a play along the boards in the game against the Kraken where he went in for a hit on, I believe, Mason Appleton, and he pulled up a little bit, laid the hit, but both players fell really awkwardly, and he landed very hard on either his wrist or his arm. And he went back into the dressing room and missed the remainder of that period, but he came back out and finished the game. And it's just, I don't know if Jake Muzzin were to be cleared, if I can enjoy watching him play hockey. Maybe that's me just being a little bit emotional, but over the last 6 months or so, this season especially, we've watched a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve just not be able to do it anymore at the level that he's used to being able to. And with the Rodion Amirov news yesterday and him being diagnosed with a brain tumor and just finishing his first round of chemo, and I'll leave the link to the article that Elliot Friedman wrote about him and that situation in the description of the video, seeing John Tavares be hurt the way that he was in last year's playoffs, watching Jake Muzzin himself be carted off in that series against the Columbus Blue Jackets, I would not be able to watch him and have fun if he were to return this year. And I think it's important to recognize just how good Jake Muzzin has been ever since the Toronto Maple Leafs have acquired him. Since the 18-19 season, there have only been 10 other defensemen who have had a higher expected goals above replacement rating. This is not an average player falling to what he is right now. This is one of the better two-way defensemen in the NHL who plays against all of the other team's best players night in and night out, and does it with a physical edge, going from that to what he is right now in the span of 6 to 8 months. Again, just a journalism student, not a doctor, but I don't think that a responsible decision about his long-term health can be made over the next 8 to 9 weeks. I don't think that we're going to see him back this season. Wednesday night, the Maple Leafs made some paper transactions in a very specific order, moving Jake Muzzin to the injured reserve, calling up Brendan Menell and Christian Rubens, and sending down Rasmus Sandin. And the idea behind doing this is that you want to get as close to $0 in cap space as you possibly can before placing a guy on long-term injured reserve. Because any dollar that you have to spare when placing a guy on LTIR is automatically wasted. If you have $1 million in salary cap space and you place a guy on LTIR who has a $5 million cap hit, you are only getting $4 million in salary relief. But if you make some nifty paper transactions to get as close as you possibly can to $0 in cap space, you can place the player in question on LTIR, receive the full relief of their cap hit, and then just send the players down that you called up on paper transactions and have access to both. So because the Maple Leafs got as close as they possibly can to $0 in cap space, they will receive pretty much the full $5.625 million in salary cap relief, and then they can just send those players back down that they recalled on paper transactions, and they'll also gain access to about $300,000 in effective space, which is why Earl says just shy of $6 million here. Now, at this point, Jake Muzzin is officially on long-term injured reserve, but as Earl made sure to point out in his article, which I will leave linked in the video description below, we can sort of get a sense of what the Maple Leafs' long-term plans are by looking at their roster decisions over the next couple of days. Now, because they placed him on LTIR so soon, it could mean that a trade is around the corner, or it could just mean that they saw an opportunity to get as close to $0 in cap space as possible to get the most amount of salary cap relief that they could, and they didn't want to risk more injuries, making that more difficult. So if Muzzin is going to be out until the beginning of the playoffs, what do the Leafs do with $6 million in cap space? And I should mention that that $6 million is not prorated. It's just $6 million in face cap hit value that they would be able to add, but there's always the possibility of getting salary retention and being able to stretch every last dollar that they have. I don't think that Jake Muzzin being out long-term changes any sort of plans that the Maple Leafs would have had to potentially move on from a Justin Holl or Travis Dermott. Those guys are in trade rumors because they are what they are. We've done several videos over the last couple of weeks looking at potential defensemen that the Maple Leafs could have traded for at the trade deadline previous to Jake Muzzin getting injured. And the asterisks in all of those videos that we were talking about is if you were going to acquire a top four defenseman, that they needed to be able to play and be a good fit next to Jake Muzzin. And we kept mentioning a quote from Sheldon Keefe from the middle of January where he touched on what Jake Muzzin has struggled with so far this year, and that's making decisions with the puck and moving it. So if you're going to get a defenseman to play with him, it doesn't make sense to also acquire a guy who struggles with those things as well. And if I'm being honest with you, in terms of responsible puck-moving right-handed defensemen, just not a whole ton available right now. And if they were, they wanted the sun and the moon for them. If Jake Muzzin is going to be out until the playoffs and the Maple Leafs can count on using that $6 million in cap space, I think it would benefit them greatly to go out there and acquire a left-handed shooting defenseman who can move the puck and is responsible with it. And then that would allow them to target a right-handed shooting defenseman who maybe doesn't do those things as well, but is able to complement the left-handed shot. And if you're saying to yourself, well, if they acquire a left shot and a right-handed shooting defenseman, where does Jake Muzzin play if he potentially comes back in the playoffs? And to that, I would say that the Maple Leafs need to be preparing themselves for Jake Muzzin not coming back this season at all. Because even if he was able to, I don't think that they would be able to rely on him to stay healthy and play a prominent role. If you're asking yourself, Steven, how are they going to afford all of that? Their prospect pool isn't necessarily the deepest, and they don't really have a lot of draft picks available to them. And I mean, not all of the deals would involve just purely picks and prospects. They do have some players on their roster that they could look to move on from and just upgrade. I mean, a guy like Alex Kerfoot has some trade value. No matter what you think of Travis Dermott and Justin Holl, they have some trade value. They're signed to relatively reasonable cap hits and for another season. If you don't think that a guy like Justin Holl at $2 million with another year left on his deal has any sort of value in a trade, you need to take a look at the list of defensemen who signed for more money than him with term, who objectively just aren't as good as him. We like to rag on him, but there are guys on this list who are worse. If we're looking at left-handed defensemen who are going to be UFAs at the end of this year, there are two names that stand out who have been thrown around in trade rumors, and that's Mark Giordano and Hampus Lindholm. Now, a guy like Mark Giordano, I don't necessarily know how quick he is at this point in his career, being 38 years old, but he still is playing over 21 and a half minutes a night for the Kraken in a primarily defensive role, and he's been fairly effective at it. I'm not going to go too in-depth on guys that they could acquire, but at the same time, Frank Saravalli does note in his most recent trade bait board, which I will leave linked in the video description as well, that Giordano probably isn't a guy who's in that first round pick return territory. So could be a value add. But I will be going in depth on guys who they could look to possibly acquire in future videos. So if you're not already subscribed and you've enjoyed this one so far, it would mean a lot if you would consider doing so. And if you're already subscribed and you've enjoyed this one, just leave me a thumbs up and you know I love you. And then Elliot Friedman on the broadcast the other night said that he would be on the JT Miller to Toronto train, and he didn't necessarily say that the Maple Leafs are interested or that both sides have even talked, but then Rick Dhaliwal early on Wednesday said that the two teams have talked, in fact, in the last 24 hours, and that the Maple Leafs are interested. I'm not going to go too in-depth on that today because I'll probably do an entire video on the matter come the weekend, but at the same time, if you're looking at the Maple Leafs top six, it would be nice to have an option better than Alex Kerfoot there on that second line. Obviously, the priority needs to be the defense, but if you're looking at the Canucks, maybe you can swing a package deal that involves a certain defenseman. I know it's hard to have conversations of possibly going all in on this team this year when they haven't necessarily played the greatest the last little while. And we did do a video talking about the defense and the goaltending and looking over in-depth stats with some contextual information yesterday, and I'll leave that linked above the screen and at the end of this one. But can you afford not to be all in? Obviously within reason, right? I'm not saying to just give away the farm and place all your eggs in one basket, but that's going to be it for this one, guys. Make sure to like the video if you did like it, and subscribe for more because more is always on the way, and maybe I'll see you again tomorrow.